Okay, so now we have our second session of the day titled Paper to Podcast, but it will touch on some other non-academic formats as well. And to deliver it, we have a communications pro and podcast host who's written for a range of non-academic platforms. Dr. Louise Grimmer is from the University of Tasmania. She is an expert in retail marketing and hedonic shopping and shopping streets, which certainly are a key form of leisure activity. So please welcome Louise.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Sophie. And thank you also to everyone who's been responsible for planning this conference and for asking me to come along and present. I'm also an ANZALS board member, so I was really happy when Sophie asked me if I'd come and talk to you about research communication, particularly podcasting. I'd also like to acknowledge the Palawa Pakenhar people of Lutruwita, Tasmania, where I am at the moment. And I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to honour their strong culture and knowledges as vital to the self-determination, well-being and resilience of Indigenous communities. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, and let's hope this all works, because I was born in the last century and sometimes technology can be a challenge for me. Sophie, can you see my
Sure
slides?
can.
Yep, great.
You're good to go.
Okay, oh great. Now look everyone, I know it can be a little bit tiring listening to a talking head on Teams or Zoom, but I hope really that this session is going to get you to think about yourself, not so much about, the things that I've done, which I'll just start off with as an introduction, but to try and get you thinking really I guess deeply in this 1 hour session about the importance of your research, and also about the importance of trying to get the word out about your research. So this is sort of, I guess, thinking about moving away from just the traditional publishing, which we all have to do. It's part of our job as academics and PhD candidates, but think about all the other ways that you can use to get the word out about your research, because a lot of the important people who need to know about your research, be that end users or, I hate the word, but key stakeholders or future collaborators or people who might give you money, they're not necessarily going to read your research in a journal. And so I've been very focused on research communication and media engagement throughout my relatively short academic career. Just a very quick introduction about my background. Before I became an academic, I didn't get my PhD until 2015. I had a baby at the same time that I did a PhD, so I used to have excellent time management skills. I think they've probably gone a bit wayward now, but I worked in public relations, marketing and communications. I'm now, as Sophie said, a retailing and marketing consumer behaviour academic at the University of Tasmania. I've been involved in well over 600 media interviews over the last few years, radio, television, podcasts, print and online, but I also create content as well. So I have a column in our local newspaper. I write a lot of op-eds and I write for industry publications, which is something that you can all think about too. I used to be a very regular contributor to the conversation. I've probably been a bit slack this year, but I'm the highest read University of Tasmania academic on the conversation, and I've also worked as a radio host, so I've been on the other side of the microphone. So I've worked for the ABC presenting a live chat show on Sunday afternoons, and I've also worked all last year on the weekends as the news presenter for Australian Radio Network, which is the largest radio network around Australia. And I've also had a podcast, and I've been a guest on a number of podcasts as well. So I hope that gives you some comfort that what I'm going to give you comes from sort of both sides of as I like to say, both sides of the microphone. So these are just some images to show you. This is I have a double page spread in the local paper, just writing about small local retailers and trying to get people excited about supporting small stores, because that's what my research is all about. If we lose them, then we don't have very great places to live or work. This was just a tag or a tile from my time at ABC Radio. I've also worked as an MC, so we used to have a lot of big events at the university pre-COVID. So this was a great one we had with the comedian Luke McGregor. Some of you might have seen Rosehaven and some of his other documentaries and shows. So he's actually an alumnus of the University of Tasmania. So that was a huge live streamed show that we had. And then the other really scary thing I did was I was asked to interview Kerry O'Brien. Some of you might not know who Kerry O'Brien is. You might be a bit young, but he is one of Australia's most well-respected journalists, and he was a host of many current affairs and news programs on the ABC for many years. And I grew up with Kerry O'Brien, and his book was this thick, and I really didn't have a chance to read the whole thing. So I was really flying by the seat of my pants for that one. But it's good to do things that scare you, I think, occasionally. And I've certainly done that. And this slide, I don't know how clear these are showing. They're not very clear on my screen, I'm sorry. This is just to show you just a sample of how journalists contact me all the time. So they'll either send me private messages on X, they'll ring me directly or SMS me directly, they'll email me, and every week I do a lot of media interviews on all different kinds of topics, not just my research. That's something that I really want to hit home to you. You're an expert in the area in which you are researching. You don't have to wait till you have some results or you've conducted a piece of your research to go and talk about it. You're actually, whatever your area is, and we're going to talk about that, you are an expert in that area, and you certainly will be by the time you finish your PhD. So I get called up on all sorts of things to do with consumer behaviour, retailing, marketing, shopping, and I'm happy to talk. Usually I do turn down a lot of media interviews because you just don't have time to do them all, because as you've learned, you've got to do teaching, service and research as well. So sometimes you've got to learn to say no. Anyway, so that's enough about me. So today what we're going to look at is these topics, why I think research communication is really important for your academic career. And, I guess just to point out, if you're ever going to be applying for a Fulbright scholarship, which is something you should all be thinking about, the research communication that I had been a part of was a really strong part of my application, and I was successful in getting a Fulbright back in 2021. And so it's not just always thinking I must publish a paper and that's it. Think about the other things that you can do, because that just builds you up as a really well-rounded academic, and you can start doing it while you're doing your PhD. Just do baby steps, and I know it's scary, but you get better at it the more you do. Then we're going to talk quickly and get you thinking about your golden thread, or sometimes this is called an elevator pitch, but in academia, at my institution, we like to call it the golden thread that runs through all of the activities you do. So it's your PhD topic, it might be the units that you're asked to teach. Sometimes you're asked to teach things that are not exactly aligned with your PhD topic, but nevertheless, when you get to choose, it's part of your golden thread. It's part of your ongoing research, future research, and it can also be part of your service and engagement. And then we're going to talk about podcasting, and I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of podcasting and then give you some tips about how to be a really great podcast guest, because it's a nice way to actually practice talking about your research that is not live radio, and it has the ability to be edited. So it's a nice introduction to talking and being interviewed about your research. Some of you may also want to host your own podcast, and obviously some of you may have already been on a podcast, or you may have your own podcast. So some of the things you might know. And then if we've got time, I'll show you some other types of research communication, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If you have questions as I go along, it's probably better, if you don't mind, if you just put them in the chat, because I may well answer them sort of, after you've asked them, and we can come and Sophie can have a look at the questions in the chat at the end, and we can cover them that way. So I hope that's all right with you. And I'm going to get you to do a few things, so it won't just be passive listening. So we're going to have a session where you'll break out with 2 other people. So yeah, don't leave them hanging. Make sure you go to the breakout room, because you're going to be talking about yourself, and it's a nice, friendly thing to do. And I'm going to get you involved. Now, Sophie, I just said chat because I'm used to Zoom. And I'm sorry to sound dumb, everyone, but yes, there's a chat function on Teams, so that's fine. Okay, great. Sorry, I don't usually use Teams. So what I'd like you to think about is, first of all, can you distill really succinctly, what is the problem that your research is trying to solve? Why is solving this problem important? Now, it might be important very hyper-locally. It might be a national problem that you're looking at. It could be something that's happening all around the world, and you're contributing to a body of research that's really important on a global scale. Usually our research does have a sort of local, national, and hopefully international impact. And so, why is this problem important? Why do you think it's important that you're addressing this? And then once you've thought about those things, have you actually ever practiced just describing your research in 2 or 3 sentences? I'm sure you've all been to a family barbecue or a Christmas lunch where members of your family, or even your friends who are not academics, who don't understand what we do, and it's very hard to explain to people what an academic does. Could you actually explain it to them in terms that they can understand? Because if you can do that, then you can go in the media and you can go on a podcast and you can explain what you do. Because the level of comprehension for the media and for a lot of podcasts, unless they're really specialist and niche, is about grade 10. About grade 10 at school level is the level that you would be writing something for the local media, or you'd be speaking to the local media. So we don't use acronyms. As Oscar said, it's much better just to speak the way you would normally speak, not to use big words to make yourself sound, highly important. If you can explain what you're doing, what the problem is you're trying to solve, and why it's important, that's a brilliant thing just to have in your head, in case you ever do get into the elevator with your Vice-Chancellor and they ask you, so what are you doing? And you can answer that and stay in their mind. So in the chat, I'd love you, first of all, just with these questions in the back of your mind, in the chat, I'd love you all to think about your research and why it's important, but to think about, why is it important to get the word outside of academia? So I can say for my research, my end users are not academics. Yes, I have to contribute to a body of knowledge in academia, but I've got a very applied, focus to my research. My end users are local government, the people who are responsible for making sure that cities, towns, suburbs, streets are really great places for people to come, to shop, to work, to visit. So if you would like to go into the chat and think about, why is it important? Who should be hearing about your research outside of the academic bubble? Sophie, do these chats show up on your screen somewhere? Or if I just click it, it shows up? Yes, it does. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm learning Teams. Sorry. Okay, thanks, Michelle. Michelle is first up. Okay. So the question is, so practical findings of your research. If you have this great research that you're doing and you have discovered all of these wonderful things that are going to help people, then just publishing it in an article is not going to be the best use of your time. You have to publish it in an article, obviously, and you'll have a thesis as well. But okay, let's have a look. Thank you, Tiago. Let's have a look. My thesis aims to make surf tourism a sustainable activity at the Gold Coast World Surfing Reserve, so local surfers and surf tourists are aware of it. Yes, that's great. So, Tiago, this is a great example, because local surfers and surf tourists, I'm imagining, are not going to read about your research in an academic journal. So you need to get your research out more broadly. So it might be that you might go on local radio. The ABC that operates out of the Gold Coast is always, well, all radio stations are looking for interesting stories. You might work with your university's media department and get a press release out to the media, and you'll have different media outlets will come and interview you about your research. Oh, there's some excellent ones coming through. This is great. Oh, okay, physical activity level, so really topical. Proposed end users for Bernardo are hospitality industry professionals. So again, yes, these people are not going to find out about your research unless you can get it into different kinds of platforms and outlets. Councils, government agencies, event planners, food service providers, and event attendees. Yes, this is great. So you can see, can you see what I'm talking about? So I've got my end users are local government, as I said, but also individual retailers, people who run retail trade associations who try to help their members, be successful. Also, just local consumers, trying to get people to think about not shopping online or not shopping with big box retailers, but actually supporting small stores. Sports managers for upskilling and recruitment. Yes, this is great. Thank you, everyone. That's fantastic. Okay, let's have a look at the next thing I'd like you to put in the chat. Yes, Jennifer, just before I do that, that's great. So older with an aging population, which is happening, in many countries around the world. Modified sport participation is so important. So that word has got to get out to all different kinds of stakeholders. Yeah, local government again, Sachia. Yeah, great. Okay, so let's have a look at my next one. Okay, now you've probably already answered this because it was sort of you're too clever and you've already put your stakeholders. So we've sort of looked at who outside academia needs to know about your research. Now the conduit to getting people hearing about your research is really the media. So even though you've all thought about the end user and stakeholders along the way, the media is really one of the important conduits or key stakeholders for you in being able to get the word out. So I'd love you to put in the chat just some ideas. I've already mentioned some, going on the radio, maybe being interviewed for television. What are some of the ways that people can find out what you're doing without going to a journal article? So give us some ideas. LinkedIn, yes, great. LinkedIn is really, I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, but it's certainly become a very good platform for academics. Trade publications, yes, you need to be aware of the trade publications that are in your area. So what I mean by trade publications are not academic journals. They are publications for practitioners, or they might be for policymakers. So, for example, one of the ones that I am often interviewed or I will write articles for is called Inside Retail. So it goes to anyone in the industry that works in retail, that manages retail, that has any interest in what's happening in our industry in Australia. Industry conferences, radio stations, social media, Instagram, television, networking groups. Yes, the university will help you if you have something interesting. Remember, it's got to have a hook for the media to get interested. Conferences, yes, but get the word out more broadly even. So use your social media accounts to say that you're presenting at a conference, or to have a photo of you presenting and give a précis and then maybe a link to other places that people can find out what you're doing. Radio, yeah. Friends and family, yes, don't forget friends and family. Word of mouth is a really great tool, and that's why you've got to be able to explain it in plain language. Okay, let's have a look now. Thank you everyone for going into the chat. Let's have a look now at why, briefly, I think research communication and or media engagement is really important for academics at all stages of your career. So whether you've just started your PhD this year, you might be at that sort of halfway point where you're starting to actually understand what it is you're doing. I remember when I first started mine, I just didn't have a clue about anything. And that's a fairly normal state. I'm sure you've all heard that from lots of people. Or you might be towards the end and really ramping up the finishing time. I think it's really important to look at all of these things that you've just put in the chat about research communication, because if you want to be an academic, or even if you want to work in industry, we all now have to have, you know, some sort of personal profile, especially in academia. And we're going to look at the golden thread. You want to be known as the XXX person, so that when people are talking about your field, or the media is looking for an expert, or a conference organizer is looking for a speaker, they have you in their mind because you've built up this nice, well-rounded profile, and research communication really can help you do that. It's also important that we work to really highlight what it is that we're working on. I mean, we all think our research is important, and it is. And the kinds of things that we're doing, the people we are researching, or the practices we're researching are really important. And it helps you, as I said, connect with key stakeholders. So, you know, one of those key stakeholders might be funders, people who are going to give you money down the track. Yeah, that's great, Annette. Yeah, put in, I put in mine, you know, I think I put retail expert or something like that. You can describe yourself as, you know, an expert in this area. It's also really good for your university. So many of you who are doing a PhD where you're not paying any fees, some of you are, I know, but it helps raise the profile of the institution that is supporting you through this process. It's great for your discipline area, it's great for your college or faculty, and also for your institution. I used to work as a chief of staff to a vice chancellor, and every morning that vice chancellor, and you know, like many others, they look at the media monitoring, and they want to see their academics in the media. They want to see who's been on television overnight, who's in the paper, who's been on the radio, and it's really important for universities now because it's such a competitive environment. It will also help you find mentors, collaborators, leading academics in your field. It's a great way to meet new people. I think, as Oscar said in his opening video, I met a lot of collaborators through just engaging on Twitter when it was a great place to be. It's now a little bit different as X, but I think LinkedIn's probably taken over there. It's also fantastic to put on your CV. You know, if I've sat on a lot of committees for job hires, and say you've got two candidates who are, you know, there's not a lot between them. If you've got one who's done research communication, who maybe has been on a number of podcasts or has been interviewed on the radio or is happy to write for the press, that person is going to be very attractive to the panel because, you know, they've got that. It's like a value added, a bit extra that they can bring to the table. It's good in and of itself because we do, as academics, get paid with public money, and so we should be telling the public what it is we are doing. And if you're going to apply for, as I said, a job, or you might be applying for a grant application, particularly those of you who might apply for a DECRA through the ARC in Australia, this can help you answer this communication question. You will have all keep hearing the word impact, impact, impact. My argument is that research communication is not impact, it's engagement, but that leads to impact. And so the more you can do this, I think the better chance you've got of getting the word out about what you're doing, and that will really help you lead to impact. Okay, so on that vein, let's talk about your golden thread. So this is really, you know, what is your research focus, or what are you known for? So let's just hop in the chat again. Can you put in, you know, one sentence what your research focus is, or it might be a couple of words. So I'll put mine in. Thanks, Jennifer. The role of sport in, oh, it's disappearing. The role of sport contributing to successful aging. Perfect. That's beautifully distilled. And, you know, I'll ask you shortly, you know, you'll have another sentence about why it's important. That's great. Nurturing EI. Now, Bernardo, can you type in what is EI? I don't know what that is. So try to don't use acronyms, because someone like me won't know what they are. Jamie, a strengths-based, multifaceted social connection measurement. Okay, now, Jamie, can you rewrite that so that it gives a little bit more information? So I can see, I mean, I understand what a strengths-based, I understand what multifaceted is. What's the social connection measurement for? What problem is it solving? Can you write that perhaps in a little bit more everyday language, I guess? Sophie, inclusive and accessible tourism in natural areas for tourists with disability. Great. Is it, Sophie, is it about enhancing, improving, creating inclusive and okay, so you might be saying that, you know, this already sort of exists, but we are working on ways to improve it, or this doesn't exist and we are looking at how you create this. Management in community sports clubs, the importance of volunteer management in community sports clubs, why supporting volunteer managers in community sports clubs can help with now, Michael, a man of two words, esports branding. Okay, tell us more. Tell us more. Esports branding. That's a big topic. Why is it important? What is it that you're actually researching? Because if I'm a radio producer and I can see that you do esports branding, I need to know more before I would think, is that something I can talk to you about on the radio? Food waste reduction at business events in Australia. Fantastic, Annette. We know that food waste reduction is important. Business events are notorious for having a lot of food waste. So I like that. And then you can add, obviously, why it's important. Now, Tiago, surfing and surf tourism, great, but a bit like Michael's. I sort of thought it was emotional intelligence, Bernardo, but I want you to put that in there because some people, you know, they may not know what EI is. Surfing and surf tourism. Tiago, can you expand on that just a little bit? Yes, it's important. What aspect of it are you looking at? You don't have to do it now, but just think about reducing plastic waste at theme parks. Fantastic. Okay, there's some really great things in there. Fostering pro-environmental behaviour in Antarctic tourists. Yeah, that's I like that. That's written really well. How people's attitudes and behaviours towards companies can change when their attention is split across multiple brands at the same time. That's beautifully written too, Harrison. Sustainability in surf tourism. That's it, Tiago. I knew there'd be, you know, there's a focus in those larger issues that you're looking at. Okay, there's some great things here. Wow, what an interesting group you are. Fantastic. Okay, so a lot of you have distilled your research into a sentence that can be easily understood by me, because I don't know anything about your topics, or by your friends and family, or someone you meet, an old school friend you meet on the street. Okay, it's important to be able to do that. Okay, so now just, you don't have to do it in the chat, but just if you've got a pen and paper, just write some quick notes, because you're going to, I'm going to put you in a breakout room in a minute. So what are you researching? So Tiago, sustainability in surf tourism. Why is it important? Why is it interesting? This topic has to sustain you for 3 to 4 years, most of you. Why, you know, why did you pick this topic? What is interesting about it to you, and what is interesting about it to the general public? How are you conducting the research? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Are you interviewing people? Is it ethnographic? Are you conducting focus groups? Do you have a lot of desktop research, etc.? And if you know at this stage, and I know it's hard depending on where you are, what are you expecting to find? That is a question that a radio interviewer would ask you. What are you expecting to find from your research? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to write those notes down. Thank you, Jamie. That's excellent. To create a measurement for use at a population level in health and wellbeing surveys that measures an individual's social connection, not loneliness. Great. That is a very topical subject at the moment. I wrote a piece for The Conversation about a supermarket chain in Holland called Jumbo, and they introduced a slow, chatty checkout called a kletkassa. And it was designed for people who were lonely and wanted to talk to someone. A lot of people, their only outing every week might be to go to the supermarket. And this supermarket chain realised this was what they could do. They thought it would be primarily older shoppers who would come through the slow, chatty checkout, but they found that it was all kinds of people, different ages, different backgrounds. They just wanted to talk to someone. It was a huge success. And they rolled it out across 200 of their supermarkets in Holland. And I wrote it up for The Conversation, and I did so much media on that topic because loneliness is increasing in so many countries around the world. Now, I know yours is not loneliness, but anything that's around social connection. I wrote another thing about how, you know, if you have a pet, you're much more likely to know the neighbours in your street. And all of these sorts of topics are really interesting for the media. So thank you. That really tells me what you're doing. That's fantastic. Yeah. Yes, it's great. Okay, so now I hope you'll do this. When I do breakouts in my teaching online, I find that the students nick off and don't go into the breakout room, which sort of ruins it for the poor person who is the only person in the breakout room. This is meant to be fun and friendly. Just think you're going to meet 2 new people. And so what I would like you to do in a minute, Sophie will put you into random breakout rooms of 3. And I've got 3 because, you know, if one of you decides to scoot off, at least there'll be 2 people who can talk to each other. So what I'd like you to do is just introduce yourselves. Hi, I'm Louise Grimmer. I'm from the University of Tasmania. I finished my PhD, or I'm halfway through. And then I'd like you to describe your PhD, just as you have in the chat, or you might improve on it. These people are not going to be familiar with your topic. And then tell them why it's important. You need to be concise, succinct, and then it's the next person's turn. I think realistically, this will take about 8 minutes. I usually say 5 minutes, and then the third person hasn't had a go because everyone gets excited and they're learning about other people's research. So what we'll get you to do is when you've finished, if you can come back into the normal presentation, then do that and we'll know that you've finished. And if everyone's come back before 8 minutes, then we'll keep going. But this is a really good way for you to practice in front of a couple of nice people, meet 2 new people and have some fun. So Sophie, are you able to do that for us? That'd be great.
Yep, the rooms are ready and I've noted down these 2 points on the slide, so I'll send them through to each group as a reminder.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay, so and if we'll let you know if you're getting close to 8 minutes as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Have
all
fun
right.
and be as concise and you know succinct as you can.
Great. Cool. Okay, opening the rooms.
So look, that's great. We've got 3 organisations. Hopefully you've met someone who you didn't know before, and I'm sure you'll have other opportunities to meet some new people. Okay, so let's have a look at Introduction to Podcasting. Now, I'm guessing if I said to you, have you listened to a podcast? Nearly everyone would say yes, because Australia, New Zealand, and have we got people from other countries on the call, Sophie, or is it mostly Australia and New Zealand?
I'm not sure. Mostly Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah. Well, Australia is one of the biggest consumers of podcasts. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little sort of overview of what a podcast is, and then we'll look at being a guest as an academic on a podcast. Okay, so a podcast, as I'm sure most of you know, is a program, a series of different episodes, and it's mostly audio. And it's portable, so you can listen to it on your phone, you could listen to it on a computer or other ways, and you can listen to it whenever you like. So the thing about a podcast is that it is a series of episodes. And so when we talk about a podcast, we mean that entirety of episodes that are usually focused on a particular topic or a theme. The podcast that I have is a retail podcast. So we look at retail. And you subscribe to a podcast so that you can listen to it whenever it suits you. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to, here we go. Can you see that? What is the purpose of a podcast? Yes. Yes, good. Okay. All right. So why did podcasting become popular? You know, sort of started around the early 2000s. It became, very popular because radio is still a very popular medium. A lot of people actually listen to the radio, and radio stations realised that with new technology, people could listen to their shows wherever they were. I don't think my slides are going to the next slide. Presenter has turned off participant navigation. Oh, that might be me. Sophie, are you able to go to the next slide or not? Sorry.
I don't think so, but let me...
No. Oh, let me... sorry, everyone. I've lost my sharing capability. Oh, here we go. No, let's try again. Here we go.
Well, feel free to just share it again. That should be okay.
Yep, just sharing it again. Oh,
your calendar.
Oh dear. Sorry. Oh, my Teams is going absolutely nuts. Sorry, everyone. Share. Stop sharing. Share. Just bear with me, everyone. I did say I was born in 1970, and I have had to learn all of the things that many of you have taken for granted. Well, that's my excuse anyway.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, right. Sorry, everyone. Let's resume, and hopefully, here we go. What is the purpose of a podcast? This is what I was trying to say. So why do people do podcasts? The PBS, which is an American institution, always had this catch cry that the public broadcasting service, so you can think about the national broadcaster in many countries, it's all about educating, inspiring, or entertaining. And do you know what? If you can do all of those three things in a podcast, then you've got a fantastic podcast. You've got the potential to have a fantastic podcast. A lot of the purpose around a podcast depends on, what's the motivation of the person who's actually creating the podcast. We saw a lot of people creating podcasts during COVID. My own experience of COVID was that I started a little radio show on a community radio station. It's called Edge Radio. It has a local community radio stations have a fairly limited broadband width that they can broadcast to. So and they needed some content because, of course, people couldn't come into the studio as they usually could. A lot of people dropped off doing their shows. So I did a little half-hour radio show, and then I turned the episodes into podcast episodes and learned how to do podcasting because, we were all learning new skills. So my podcast motivation was just around having a little show that was about retailing, because there wasn't really anything out there at the time. Some people do it because it's a hobby. Some people do it because it's just a creative outlet for them. They're really passionate about a topic. Some people do it because they actually want to build a business and they want to get advertising revenue, etc. An example of what has, sorry, this is all going a bit funny. There we go. An example of, how this all started is if you think about BBC Radio in the UK, Radio 4. They've run a radio program for many, many years. It's called More or Less Behind the Stats, and it's all about numbers and economics and things. Now, that radio program, like all radio programs, is on at the same time every week, and you have to tune into your radio to listen to it. But what happened was radio stations, all around the world realized that with podcasts, they could actually get more listeners because they could publish each of their episodes as a podcast episode. And it meant that people could subscribe to the program and listen to them anytime rather than having to dial into the radio. Now, for commercial radio stations, this is incredibly important because commercial radio stations make their money through selling advertising space, and their clients want to buy advertising with the top rated radio shows or with the radio shows that have the listeners that they are trying to connect with. It doesn't matter so much for government funded radio stations, although they are still very interested in ratings because they have to justify the money that's spent on them to the government and to the public. But if you think about it, being able to sort of monetize a radio program has really excited the media landscape and all of the different kinds of publishers that are in the media landscape in different countries around the world. So the BBC example isn't necessarily a full answer to the question, what's a podcast? So yes, there are radio shows that have become podcasts, but there are also just completely original content shows that have become incredibly popular podcasts, not just a repurposing of the radio. So think about this. As you know, those of you who listen to podcasts, they can be any kind of length. They might be a really quick news snippet. So we did a local radio podcast when I was a news presenter last year at Radio HOFM. It was called I Love Tassie, and it came out every week and it went for about 20 minutes. It could be a really long podcast. It could be, a 3-hour episode. Most podcasts tend to be about half an hour to an hour. But, it depends on the topic and the people who are hosting the podcasts. You might put a podcast out every day. Some radio stations do put out quick news podcasts every day. A lot of podcasts come out every week. Some come out monthly. Some come out whenever the podcast host can be bothered doing an episode. But I think that, the key to it is that subscribers like to know that their the new podcast episode comes out every week on a Friday or whatever it might be. Because a lot of people really anticipate the new episode of the podcast that's coming out, particularly if you like true crime, which is one of the most popular topics in podcasting. People like to get the next episode when they're listening to true crime podcasts. They can be any format. It might be someone just talking to themselves. It might be a host who interviews people each week. It might be a panel or multi-person, really highly curated and produced episode, and it can be on any topic. Now, if you think about this, there are a lot of topics that will never make it onto a radio show, and I'm sure you can think of lots of topics that this would cover. Well, a podcast can really do whatever it likes. And so that's why a lot of people have really got interested in them. And if you do a deep dive into this, there are some really niche topics that I had no idea people were interested in. However, let's just have a look more broadly. There are about 4.2 million podcasts around the world. And, that's about 70 million episodes that are going on at any time. The number one podcast in the world is the Joe Rogan Experience. I've never listened to it. Some of you might have listened to it. He has 3 billion listeners. That's absolutely mind-blowing to me. Think of the power that Joe Rogan has. His podcast was bought by Spotify for, I think, $200 million. I think I would have charged a bit more, actually, if I had 3 billion listeners, although maybe the listeners went up once Spotify purchased the podcast. And what that means is that you can only listen to the Joe Rogan Experience if you're a subscriber to Spotify. That's a very clever collaboration. Australians are, in the English-speaking world, those of you who are Australian, we tend to really like podcasts. 43% of people aged over 12 have listened to a podcast in the last month, and that's about 9 million people. So it's a very, very popular platform. So this was my dinky little podcast. Please do not go and listen to it, because since I started it, I have learned many things, and my delivery was dreadful. It's much better in a podcast if you just don't use notes. I think I used to type up my entire, my entire script, and it's just painful to listen to. But it's good. Look, it's good practice. You might have 7 people who've listened to your podcast. You might have, 7,000 people if you have a good podcast. So this podcast started off just with me, and I would interview academics. I would gather up some news for the week, and I'd read the news. And then I might look at a paper or a topic or a certain retailer and just sort of talk about that. The interviews with local retailers were fun, but hard to do during COVID. And then I got a co-host. I had a guy who I was interviewing a lot, Jason Pallant. I think he's now RMIT. And we did it for a while as co-hosts, just to take the pressure off a bit. And then he took over for a year. I stepped down, and he changed the format. So I was doing a strict half hour, because I think that's long enough for people. He was going an hour or longer, and I think it's too long for retailing. I'd rather do more frequent episodes and have them shorter. But it was a lot of work, because back then we were using proper equipment and we were editing, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts where they don't edit at all. If they make a mistake when they're talking to someone, it just goes straight through. And actually, I don't mind that. It seems a lot more real than, some of these slick productions. So we had some seasons where they were just interviews with people. They were far too long. And it's a thing you can learn as you go along. So let's talk about you guys and how some of you may well have already been a guest on a podcast. I've been on a few, including some big ones, actually. I've been on one of the Mamma Mia podcasts a couple of times. So during COVID, when podcasts really took off, Mamma Mia, which is if you're not in Australia, it's a publishing platform, sort of like it's like a huge institution started by Mia Friedman, and they have a range of different podcasts. They wanted to know what shoppers were buying and what we were all spending our money on and how we were all nesting at home and all of that sort of stuff. And I was interviewed by a very experienced radio interviewer, Mel Tate. And so that was a great experience, because she knew what she was doing, and I sort of knew what I was doing because I'd done a lot of interviews, and it was a great conversation. I've been on other podcasts. I was on the iHeart Tassie podcast. That was fine too, but it does get edited, and sometimes the things you're saying get chopped out, and so never get too upset about that sort of thing. But let's look at how you might be a great podcast guest. So if you're asked to be on a podcast, you can always say no, but my advice is that have a go. It's a really good way to practice and ease yourself into being interviewed, and it's not live. So if you make a fluff, or you say, can I start again? You can do that, because podcasts can be edited. So before you appear on the podcast, you need to do some preparation. Now, you don't have to take hours and hours to do it, but I think you'll have a better experience if you do a little bit of prep. Now, what you need to remember, first of all, is that people who are running podcasts, or people who are interviewing you on the radio or the television, their job is to bring out the best in you. It's not to catch you out. It's not to make you look silly. It's not to make you look like you don't know what you're talking about, and they do, because I can tell you they don't. Their job is to make themselves look great by treating you really well and having an excellent conversation with you. And I speak as a former radio presenter. I had some great interviews with people, because we had some really fantastic people who could really talk in an interesting way. And I had some dreadful interviews with interviewees who just, weren't particularly friendly or enthusiastic. And you never ask those people back on your show. But if you do a little bit of prep, which will include the following. So first of all, familiarize yourself with the podcast. If you haven't heard of it before, listen to a few of the episodes and get a feel for the format, for the kinds of questions that the host is asking the interviewee, and also, you know, maybe the sort of the length of how long you might be interviewed for, and maybe the depth that they're actually, is it going to be just sort of a broad overview chat about surfing tourism? Or is it really going to, is this person, you know, one of those interviewers that actually really does research on their guests, and they're really going to drill down into some of the, you know, focus on sustainability or whatever it might be. Read some of the reviews of the podcast and see how it's been rated, and do research the host. If you can, and also if you're going to be on a podcast with other guests, because sometimes that's actually really fun, see if you can do some research on them as well. So they might, for example, I might bring in 3 academics that all research AI in consumer loyalty programs, for example. And the reason you do that is just to have what we call light and shade. So you're not just got one voice, or you're not just interviewing one person. Now, usually it is just a one-on-one, but panel episodes can be fun as well. The big thing, though, is consider your audience. Who is it who listens to this podcast? Is it a generalizable audience, people who might be interested in surfing, for example? Or is it a more specialist audience of people who you think might have some sort of academic or practical knowledge of the topic? And the reason I'm saying that is, if you've got a more general audience, and you can ask the host this before you do it, then your answers need to appeal to that general audience. They need to be easy to understand. They need to be the types of things that I've asked you to type and to talk about, just at that broader level. But if it's a more specialist audience, then you can really get into the nuts and bolts of the importance of your research and the types of things you're doing. So you always need to think about who is actually listening to the podcast episode. And then I've just got that final point there. If you can, think about something interesting about you and your research. So what I mean is, it's always great to have a little anecdote or a tale up your sleeve. You might not have the opportunity to share it, but if you can talk about something funny. So, you know, one of the things that I always say to people is, when I told people back in 2010 that I was leaving my well-paid, secure job to do a PhD in retailing, people just used to burst out laughing at me, which I thought was quite rude. And they'd say, oh, you're just doing a PhD because you love shopping. You're just doing it on retailing because you love shopping. And I would say, well, I do like shopping, but I like retailing more. And I think retailing is really important, because everything that we're wearing and using and doing comes through the retail chain, and it has a, you know, it affects our daily lives, blah, 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 blah. And so, you know, I always tell that little story that people always laughed at me. And now the last laugh is on me, because I'm the only academic in Australia that does this research on Main Street shopping. And it means that people invite me to go to conferences and give talks, and it's turned out to be fantastic. So, Sarah, what does your research the host mean? Yeah, I just mean just do a Google search about them. They might be an academic. You can look at their page at their university. You can see what kind of papers they've published, what kinds of research communication they do themselves. Go on LinkedIn and ask other people. Just find out whatever you can about them. So, for example, if I asked you to come on my podcast, you know, maybe because I'm looking at shopping as a leisure activity, which it is for many people, you could easily find out a lot about me on Google. You could listen to some of the episodes of the podcast. You could see that I'm a you know, pretty casual, chatty person, and I'm not going to be interrogating you, and it's going to be a fun kind of chat, and you could see the sorts of things I'm interested in. Because what you can say as a guest is, oh, well, Sophie, look, thanks for having me on the show. I know that you've done some research in blah, blah, blah. And, you know, this topic beautifully aligns with, you know, because it's a conversation that you're going to have with the person. It might also show you that you don't want to go on the podcast. Okay, so this research is, you do this and you might say, you know what, this is making me, it's going to take a lot of time, and I don't know that this is for me. So if you've done that research, you can make that decision. If you've decided that you are going to go on the podcast, these questions here are what we get taught in media and public relations studies. Every story that you read in the paper or that you listen to on the radio has asked these questions to begin with. So you will always get something about, okay, who are you? What are you doing? Where are you doing it? When are you doing it? What's the time frame? And why are you doing it? Who, what, where, when, and why. That's the basis of an article or an interview. And then if you're a politician, you might get asked, how much is it costing and who's paying for it? But you won't get asked that as an academic. But these are the questions that you can prepare for. You know, I'm Louise Grimmer, I'm a blah, 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 blah. My research, what is it? It's all about da, 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 da. Why? Because blah, blah, blah. When did you do it, or when are you doing it, or when are you going to be doing your data collection? Where are you going to be doing all of this? You already know that, but you'll have your notes ready because they're the sorts of questions that you'll be asked. And some of the questions might be framed then. Tell me about your topic, Sophie. What is it that you're researching? Why? Well, oh, that's really interesting. And why is it important that we know about this? What sort of change is this going to bring about? Who can bring about that change? And then an interested interviewer might ask you, depending on your topic, what are some of the common myths or misconceptions about your area of research? So one of the things that I always try to get into my interviews, if they're about local shopping, is that, you know, there's a misconception that everyone is shopping online and no one goes to physical stores anymore and no one wants to. Well, that's just a complete misconception. Yes, people are shopping online, and yes, it's certainly increased as a result of COVID, but about 70% of Australian consumers really enjoy shopping in physical stores. And so we've got to make that industry the best that we can, blah, 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 blah. I won't go on. Okay. There will usually be some questions about you. So share a little bit about your background. How did you become interested in this topic? Oh, well, I'm a keen surfer and I noticed that blah, 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 blah. Or I had an injury when I was younger and da, 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 whatever it might be. Something that's interesting about you. What other study have you completed before you started doing your PhD? What other degrees have you got? What areas have you been interested in? What really sparked your interest? Why are you passionate about this topic? You know, what do you like about this kind of research? And what are some of the challenges that you've found? Okay. The other big question is, should you ask for the questions before the interview? Some podcast hosts will have a policy that they do not give the questions out to the guest. And I agree with that policy because you want to have a conversation. If I give you out my list of questions, it means that you've answered a question and you're looking at the next question and how you're going to answer it. But I might find something interesting in your previous answer and actually want to explore that further. And a good interviewer will be listening to what you're saying. They won't be looking at their list of questions. You could go off in an entirely different tangent. What you might do then is say, well, look, would you mind just giving me the first question that you're going to ask me? Because then I can just think about my answer. I'm going to be a little bit nervous and it will just prepare me, and I'll feel, once you get that first answer out and your heart's up here and you're beating up in your mouth, you start to feel a lot better. I'll have this on another slide, but always have a glass of water, because one of the physiological reactions of doing something a little bit nervous is your mouth dries up. I'm not nervous, but I just took a sip then. But I was at a conference the other day and I wasn't nervous, but my mouth dried up and I didn't have a glass of water and it was dreadful. So you probably won't get the questions, but you can ask for the first one. But I've given you some of the things that they're going to ask you. You need to remember that the interviewer won't have done a huge amount of research into your topic. They're not an expert on it at all. They might be interested in surfing. They might be interested in sustainability. They might be interested in making beaches accessible, but they do not have the depth of knowledge that you have. You're there to provide that information, and they're not trying to catch you out. Okay, that's another important thing to remember. It's not supposed to be a combative interview, because most of you are not doing anything controversial and you're not a politician. Okay, politicians are trained in interview techniques. Okay, so during the show, or while the show is being recorded, See if you can invest in a good microphone. I've got a Yeti microphone here. I think it was about $100. I plugged this in today to speak to you through it, but Teams didn't like my setup, so I'm not using that, but I always use a good microphone. Some of you might have one already for teaching and things like that. Make sure you're in a quiet environment where your phone is not going to go off, where, if people knock on your door, put a sign on the door saying, I'm recording, I'm not available, and make sure you've got no distractions. So maybe turn your email off and your phone and all of those sorts of things. Have your notes with you, because it's great. No one can see that you're actually reading from notes if you need to. Not that you're going to read word for word, but if you've got some stats that you can't remember, I always have some statistics or some sort of fact that I can add into my answers. Have a pen in case you want to write down something that you thought of but you didn't say, and have your water. And remember, if you make a mistake, it can be edited, so it's not the end of the world. And that's why doing a podcast is a really great thing to do.
Can I just jump in, Louise?
Yes.
Sorry, just quickly. I'm just conscious of the time.
Oh gosh, the time. This is my last slide about being a guest.
Cool. Okay, so we probably don't want to keep going for too much longer because we still want to have time for some questions. But if anyone does need to drop off the call, we're still recording and you'll be able to catch up at a later time. But if you're able to stay on for a bit, just for a little bit, we'll be able to have some questions with Louise.
Yes, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm normally a very good guest and I stick to time. I've got extra slides that I'm not going to talk to them, but you'll have a copy of them, and there's some tips in there about hosting your own podcast and also writing for the conversation. And I'm happy for you to contact me. This is my last slide, and then we can have Q&A. So when you're on the show, try to make sure that you're in a really good mood before you do the recording. So if you've just had a fight with someone, or or an argument with someone, or your boss is really, or your supervisor's really annoyed you, maybe just calm down, have some chocolate or coffee or whatever your go-to thing is, and just really prepare yourself so that your voice is really warm and conversational. When you talk, I know it sounds funny, I try to I'm doing it now and you can see me, so it's a bit embarrassing, but I try to smile when I'm on the radio. And when I was presenting, I tried to laugh and smile when I'm talking, because my show was a chat show. It's really good to have energy and be enthusiastic. If you can stand up while you're doing it, it's actually better. Your diaphragm it relaxes more. You'll have a better quality of sound that will come out, and you're really sort of getting into the interview. Try and have concise answers, unlike me rambling on. You could reference prior episodes where they might have talked about something that is interesting. That's always great for the podcast host. Just be honest and authentic. Be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Just be yourself. That's why you've been asked to be on the show. You're the expert in the topic. And, hosts love it if you really, have fun, show your passion and enjoy the experience. And the more you do it, the better it will get. And then you can transfer those skills onto radio interviews and other things. I've got slides all about that, and they'll be part of the slide pack that you can have. So I'm going to stop talking because that's just really embarrassing. I've gone completely over time. But I just wanted to show you the slide I've got with my email on it if you want to email me. And see, I thought I'd get through all this. Isn't that ridiculous? Oh, thank you for the clapping hands. That's very good. You can see that I've got all this stuff where you can write for the convo. And then right at the end, I have got there it is. There's one there. So you can feel free to email me. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on X as well. So I'm sorry I talked over time. Does anyone have any burning questions that I can answer very quickly? And please accept my apologies. It's very bad practice to go over time. You can put them in the chat if you don't want to ask them, or maybe I've talked so much that I've overwhelmed you. Yes, Michelle.
I'll ask one. Hi, Louise. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was all awesome. So thank you very much. What I was thinking was, if we've prepared a paper, it's a journal article, something, what would we do? What's the key thing, I guess, to change that from the audience for the journal to a podcast or other?
Do you mean if you're going to be a guest on a podcast, Michelle?
If you're a guest, yes.
Yeah. So you'd be, if you've got a paper and you're and someone has read your paper and they've asked you to come on the podcast, they will have read your paper, and you can use those who, what, why, where, how, and when questions to tease out the elements of your paper that are really important. So if you think about your literature review, that is thinking about, well, look, these are some of the studies that people have done in the past and what they've looked at. But we found that there was this gap around whatever it is, and that's what we're looking at in our research. Then you get to your method section and you say, so what we're thinking of doing in our research is we're going to do focus groups, and we want to talk to people who blah, 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 who don't normally have a voice, da, 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 da. And look, we're thinking that what we might find is this, or if you've already done the research, we thought we'd find that most people were utilitarian shoppers. But what we found was actually around half people are hedonic shoppers. They really enjoy shopping, and the other half are utilitarian. Now, this is important because blah, 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 blah. So if you pull out that each section has at least 1 or 2 sentences that you can put into your normal speak, and you could work with the podcast host depending on how they approach, how they approach their program, just to say, these are the important points that I think we should touch on in the interview. The other way of doing it, everyone, and Michelle, is that sometimes I invited people who I didn't know because they'd written a conversation article. Would you be wary about sharing your research? Look, some people are, I think you should share what you are researching, the area that you're researching, and why it's important. You might not share any data at this stage. That's a really good question. So if you are, now, I mean, if you're doing a whole lot of semi-structured interviews, or you're doing some focus groups, you could just say, look, we're still doing data collection, or we're still analysing the data, or I'm analysing the data. But some of the themes that have come out from our focus groups so far are blah, 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 and you just keep it at that really high level. Yes, I wouldn't be sharing data and statistics and those sorts of things, because that's for your paper. You want to save that for your journal article. But you can certainly share high level findings, and I always refer to them as themes, or something interesting that we found was this, and share something that's really interesting and important about your research. I was just going to say, I often contacted people who'd written something in the conversation, and those people are primed, ready to talk, because they've just written an 800-word article in the conversation, which is all in normal language, and they know the kinds of questions that they're going to get asked because they've already done all that work in the convo. So the one thing I just want to say before I stop talking is that if you have a supervisor or a senior colleague, or a peer or a colleague who has written for the conversation, or who is writing for the conversation, ask them if they will mentor you, ask them if they will help you and put you on one of their conversation articles. It's not like a journal article where all the work has to be, you've got to say what you did, and it's not fair if you didn't do, all of the same work. A conversation article is entirely different. You could have a third of it. Oh, thanks, Sophie. You could have a third of an article, and you will be, the second or third author on the conversation. And someone needs to show you how to do it, because it's a very different way of writing, but it's an excellent thing to do. And I encourage all of you to try and think about an interesting hook in your research that would make a great conversation article. If you're not familiar, check them out and read the kinds of articles that they're publishing. Look at the things that they're doing, and don't be upset or dissuaded if your pitch is rejected. The rejection rate is about 98%. Everybody wants to publish on the conversation, and that's why I suggest finding a mentor or a more senior colleague in your area who's done it before, who will help you. And I see the recording has stopped. Oh no, it's still going. I was just going to say, your university will have workshops about writing for the conversation. They're free. Go along to them. The Convo also often hosts open meetings with the editorial team that you can go and see how they run things. and yeah, go to anything you can about research communication, writing for the conversation, all kinds of things. Great advice. Thanks, Sophie. Talking, and you can have all of those slides, and I'm so sorry I didn't get through everything, but I really wanted you to talk to each other and practice distilling your research so that when you go to the next Christmas barbecue, you won't give a 2-word answer, or you won't give a 150-word answer. You'll have 2 beautiful sentences. Thanks, everyone. It was great to be able to talk to you, and thanks for your participation. It's really welcomed by me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Louise. And yeah, if you've still got questions for her, her email address is right there. So by all means, reach out. So yes, thank you so much, Louise.
Yep, thanks everyone. Take care and enjoy the rest of the conference, and best of luck for your PhDs. We've all been there, and the main thing is just keep going. Just keep going. Don't give up. In the words of Winston Churchill, never give up, never give up, never give up. It's worth it in the end. All right, take care everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Louise. Bye.